Well, hello, I'm Gordon Samuel of the Osborne Samuel Gallery here in Dering Street in London. And my guest is Jenny Uglow, who is a very distinguished, award-winning author, biographer, writer.
That'll do.
That'll do. We are here to discuss Jenny's latest book, which is called Sybil and Cyril, Cutting Through Time. And you will see behind me a number of the liner cuts by Cyril Power and Sybil Andrews, and that will be the topic of our discussion today. So I hope you enjoy it. Jenny, welcome, and thank you for being here. I suppose the first question I ought to ask you is, what brought you to the subject of Sybil Andrews and Cyril Power? I mean, they're very well known amongst a certain audience, but some people would say obscure.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, you've had rave reviews of this. I mean, you've had the Spectator, the Times, the Financial Times, and the Times Literary Supplement, and they've all been absolutely wonderful. But some have used the word obscure. Anyway, how did you come to the subject?
Well, it's a personal book for me, it's lovely to be here and see the work on the wall, because I grew up with these two prints, Cyril Power's The Eight, the rowers, and then Sybil Andrews bringing in the boat, which is also an H, but her men are lifting it up, bringing it on land. And that was because my father was a rower. And as a wedding present, his best man, his friend who also rowed, just gave him these two prints. So I lived with them literally all my life. And you take things for granted sometimes, don't you? And then suddenly I stopped and I looked and I thought, who are these people? And that was the beginning. I wanted to know their story and I wanted to know more about their art.
And it's a pretty wonderful story of a man who was 49 years old who left his wife and his 4 children,
yes.
And a 24-year-old. Anyway, we'll come on to the story.
No,
now.
he did. And this is Sybil and Cyril just before they met during World War I. Sybil came from Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk, and her father, her grandfather really ran an ironmonger's shop, so she knew about iron and welding and things. And in the war, she became a welder in the aeroplane factories in Coventry and then in Bristol, making the first metal planes. Very, very daring. She was still at school when the war broke out, so she was very young. And the aeroplanes she made, by an odd, as it were, coincidence, some of them would end up at an airbase in Kent, where Cyril Power, as you say, was in charge of organising that. And I think that the thing is that the First World War was really crucial in their lives, and it didn't bring them together. They came together afterwards, but I think that it sort of fed through their work.
As it has here. I mean, the air raid is several years, 18 years after the First World War, and 3 years before the Second World War, and sledgehammers on the left. Well, you told me a wonderful story about sledgehammers.
Yes, well, it's Sybil's story. She's good at stories.
She is.
But she said that when she was working as a welder, the women were only allowed to use small blowpipes, and there was an emergency call from the blacksmith shop for someone to bring a large blowpipe, and the men were all busy. So Sybil was sent, and when she got there into the blacksmith shop, there was this group of men, and she said all naked to the waist and tattooed with their great sledgehammers. And she told the story of the rhythm. It's the rhythm that fascinated her. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, crash. And she said it was tremendously exciting and frightening, and she never forgot it. So years later, that's what you see in this wonderful rhythmic lino cut of the sledgehammers bashing down at the anvil. Cyril, it's a good example of their difference of styles too, because she's very dramatic. She uses the block. Cyril uses the line, much more flowing. It's almost more poetic. I think that this was something that he remembered. There were big raids on Folkestone and on the airbase. And he's going back to it at a time when there's trouble in Europe and the shadow of war is coming forward. But it was after the war in Bury St Edmunds that they met.
And here we are in Bury St Edmunds, and these are the watercolours that they produced in the early 1920s. And they have no indication of the modernism that was to come. I mean, they're beautifully executed. They're very, very good watercolours, but nothing like what will come.
Fascinating.
So they met in Bury St.
Yes, and during the war, Sybil had done a correspondence course. She wanted to be an artist. Her father, who had left the family firm and emigrated to Canada, was also artistic, but she said they'd had paints, from childhood on. Cyril came to Bury because it was the hometown of his wife, Dorothy Nunn, and they would mix in the same Bury circles. Now he is an architect, a very good professional architect, with a passionate interest in medieval building. He did a 2-volume work on medieval English architecture. And when they drew together, they worked together, and then when they had their first exhibition together, a year after these watercolors, in 1921, the people of Bury, you're quite right, but they said these were modern, but not clearly modern, but not too alarming. And I think it is the flow of the shadows, the concentration on the angles. You might date them from the 1920s, but they certainly don't look modern to us, do they? No, they don't.
And the story is that she was drawing in the street, as one of the street scenes in Bury, and he came upon her.
Yes.
And corrected her and showed her how to gain perspective. Is that right?
That's the story. And certainly later, when they did topographical prints, he would, she said, sit her down in front of the most difficult old building and tell her to get on with it. It was really a shared passion and a shared interest. But when they had this exhibition, it was the first time that they set themselves as artists together. They both had studios in the same building. It was, and Cyril, who already had 3 children, their 4th child was born exactly at the same time as the exhibition. Yes. So he looked very much a family man, and she was the young woman. So it was rather shocking to people, I think, that they did get together. And a few months later, Sybil left for London, and Cyril followed her.
But she left in 1922.
Yes.
And went to enrolled at Heatherley's School of Art.
Yes.
And I believe Beatrice, her mother, paid for a flat in London.
That's right.
And I think so. Cyril was missing her terribly and followed her to London.
He did,
leaving 4 children.
Amazing, including a baby.
Including a baby and his wife.
Yes.
And there they stayed.
And indeed they did. I mean, Cyril continued with his work as an architect. He wanted to provide for the family, but he was never very good at it. But clearly his wife, Dolly, felt it very keenly, and she actually left Bury. It was too difficult for her, and went to St Albans to begin with. Yes.
So here we see the school on the top left, which is Heatherley's, and it was run by the deputy was Ian McNabb, who was the deputy principal, who started his own school, the Grosvenor School, in 1925. And here we have some images of the Grosvenor School. There's the lithographic room on the lower left, and the life room on the right-hand side, and Eileen Mayo who was also a liner cutter at the Grosvenor School,
Yes.
posing there.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I think there's a real difference in feeling. That Heatherley's was quite informal in comparison to places like the Slade or Royal Academy schools. But the proprietor, as it were, Henry Massey, who's in that picture, white hair and quite fussy, and Ian McNabb, who was younger, an immensely talented wood engraver and a clearly delightful man. Couldn't take running it for Massey anymore. And the Grosvenor School was much more modern and much more go ahead.
Much more progressive.
Much more progressive. And they had this special print room. You see the lithographic room there, and a life drawing room. And it was a very sociable and interesting place. And Cyril went with Ian McNabb, they were good friends, to lecture on architecture, and Sybil became the school secretary.
And the Grosvenor School was, I mean, geographically, just to tell people who don't know, was in Pimlico, not far, just behind Victoria Station. Yes. And it was first built for James Ranney Swinton, who was a Scottish portraitist. Yeah. And it's still there, and it's a private home now. Yeah. And I actually met the person who owned it, who recently bought something from us.
Oh, right.
for the Grosvenor School, of the Grosvenor School prints.
Yes, yes. And it was clearly a beautiful and eccentric building with these lovely skylights and shapes. A very good place to be. They, although they were in London and they felt at the Grosvenor School they were on the cutting edge of something really kind of modern, they had to make a living as artists, and that's the trouble. And these etchings, which Sybil called her bread and butter etchings, topographical etchings, they go back to, as it were, what they were doing in Bury. And Ian McNabb often printed them for them. And this is Stratford-on-Avon, and then Cyril's of Canterbury. And they sold these through print shops across the country.
They made groups of 13.
They did, baker's dozen.
A baker's dozen, which they sold to various print shops.
Yeah.
And I believe that they also did etchings of the Oxford colleges, which they would sell to the academics, I suppose.
Academics and tourists.
And tourists and students.
Yeah. So they tried to, as it were, make a commercial living. And they kept on doing this for some years, even when they were lino cutting. But really, being in London, they felt on the edge of something completely new, and they tried to work out, they put together their own sort of manifesto called Aims of the Art of Today, which said this is a brutal, harsh, satanic sort of age, but our modern architecture also has a grandeur and a sternness, and really need an art that's going to reflect that, and it looks underneath the essence. So while they were doing this kind of prints, they were also beginning to do something that is more recognizable.
So these are still about mid-1920s?
Yes, 1924, 1926.
And of course they were at the Grosvenor School from 1925 onwards.
They were, yes, they were. So they're doing that, but they're also making these
this is the beginning of their modernism.
It is.
Where I can see the curves on the railway at the bottom left. That Cyril really liked, and you can see this in the later work from the tube station, where the curve of the tube. And the drawing on the top left is Cyril's, but the etching is Sybil's.
Exactly. They working together, they shared notebooks and so on. And they went around London. And Cyril, as an architect, was also very interested in ferroconcrete and what modern materials would do. But it is, as you say, it is this sense of power, heaviness, weight, strength. And they're already, before lino, working in blocks and in shapes and in angles of verticals or horizontals. It's a very wonderful sort of sense of what is the underlying design of the city.
I mean, they're almost interchangeable. You can't really be hard pressed to say which one was by whom.
You would, yes, you would. And I've seen a monoprint too in colour of Pickle Herring Street. So something clearly that was something that fascinated them, the way that the streets being overtaken. It's like robots, it's as if it's come alive, isn't it? With strange sort of figures marching towards you.
As we talked last time about the Pickle Herring Street being a little bit like you know, a Fritz Lang film.
Yes, yes.
Of very sci-fi.
It is. With you can imagine people rushing backwards and forwards across the abyss. And I think that Sybil's Cannon Street Railway Bridge is terrific too, the way it comes out of the frame, so that you almost want to duck, you know, to get your head down to miss it. And so they're sort of ready for something new. And something new comes along in 1926. And this is when Claude Flight comes to teach classes at the Grosvenor School.
So he was invited by MacNab to join the staff in 1926. What is so remarkable is that he only taught there on a Tuesday afternoon from 4:30 to 6:30. And as you said, with Heathersley's, you did not need any matriculation or GCSEs.
You just paid for your
course. You just paid for a bunch of tickets, a carnet of tickets, and then you would just sit down and then you would work.
Yes.
And so Flight here taught this method of liner cutting, which was really very, very revolutionary.
Yes.
You know, because before they used what was a key block, you know, where you just draw the line, as we did when we were children at school, and had birthday cards that we made for parents, or potato prints, you know, that sort of thing. But he took away the key block and he said to them, look, you've got to draw designs on one color on each block, and then they're superimposed on top of the other. So the key block was taken away and replaced by multiple blocks for multiple colors, which went over each other.
Yes, and Cyril and Sybil signed up for his courses straight away, even though they're on the staff, but they certainly signed up. And they had seen him. I think we have to remember how exciting the 1920s was in the art world in London. I mean, Picasso had a Cubist show, which did not go very well, apparently. Cézanne, on the other hand, had an amazingly successful show. Van Gogh is the great hero of the art. This is all happening very near where we are now, you know, in Bond Street. And there are groups of artists like the 7 and 5 group, and Claude Flight exhibited with them. And this is the line it cuts at early speed, 1922. And it shows what the feeling was also about the city, because Flight had known Nevinson, who knew Marinetti and the Italian futurists, and earlier in 1914, Marinetti and Nevinson together had written this manifesto which says, hurrah for speed, you know, hurrah for the buses, hurrah for the cars. London, with its neon signs and everything, is the city of energy. So that's tremendously important for Cyril and Sybil coming after them. It just put its finger on that excitement of the time.
Yes, it was an exciting time in London in the 20s, because new buildings were going up. Not that this is Flight is a new building; it's a Nash row of shops and buildings down Regent Street. But
I think that it sorry, I have a glass of water. You're quite right. In terms of their art, the important thing was that Flight taught them to look at the block rather than the line. So they start thinking in terms of blocks. He was also technically very interested in geometry. I mean, really quite precise, and talking about using intersecting circles and triangles, so that the energy seems to radiate from a central point, and you get this almost sort of geometric feeling of energy. And he said he gave that gave it both harmony and dynamism. And in Cyril Pyre's sketchbooks, for instance, and in Sybil's work, which is in the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, you often find these geometric drawings with overlapping lines. And if you look at their very early liner cuts that they both did, you see exactly how this works. And these are their first real lino cuts. And they're both about places that were terribly important to them. Cyril is a Catholic, and this is a lino cut that's based on Westminster Cathedral, the new Catholic cathedral in
Victoria.
London. Sybil, her concert hall was the Queen's Hall, famous concert hall, bombed in the wall. And anybody who'd been there would immediately recognize that. So they're both, in a sense, realistic. You can see that that's an ecclesiastical building. You can see that that's a concert hall. But she said, looking up and seeing these great circles swirling round, it's tremendously dramatic. But you also see what Flight is telling them about triangles and intersecting circles.
Simplicity.
Absolute dead simplicity. So it and Sybil said, you know, to see it was so wonderful. So all those bold lines. And it's actually very intricate. We look at the wedges, as it were, that are holding up this wonderful circle. So they're really getting going. And within a year, or the same year that Cyril did Concert Hall, of course, they have their first exhibition.
Yes, which was organised by Rex Nakoda, who I knew very well because he was the chairman of Redfern Gallery, which he joined about 1926. He was a very far-sighted man, and he did wonderful exhibitions that I know of in London. Jablonski to London for the first time in the 50s. But during 1926, when he joined the Redfern, it was at 27 Old Bond Street, and it was called Redfern House, and it was a fashion house. And the gallery was right on the top floor. And it was run by a man called Maxton Graham and another man called Arthur Nibbit Lee. And apparently, I didn't know until I read your book that it was Arthur Nibbit Lee who actually went to the Grosvenor School and saw the lino cuts. But Rex was a New Zealander, and he came during the First World War as a soldier. And he had a benefactor called Fanny. I'm trying to remember her name. Anyway, she lived in Wiltshire, and he stayed with her. And somehow or the other, he, having had no money, ends up being a partner in the Redfern, probably with Fanny's backing. And so that's the catalogue there for the first exhibition that he arranged. And he arranged subsequent exhibitions right through the 30s. But he had a falling out with Claude Flight, didn't he?
Yes, he did. I mean, Rex was quite a sort of rogue in his way.
He was a gentle rogue.
That's
he
why
didn't pay his artists.
No, he didn't. That's why he's so successful, because I think that he was true entrepreneur, fantastically enthusiastic, arranging exhibitions in Shanghai, California, whatever. But it took them at least 2 years to
try and
get paid, and they're not getting paid very much. If you look at the catalogue, these prints are selling for 3 guineas, 2 guineas at most. And yes, but when Claude Flight moved from the Redfern towards Gallery, Sybil and Cyril did stay with Rex. Yes. They were very fond of him, but the impact of that lino cut exhibition was tremendous, because it also fits in with the Art Deco mood of the time, and you can see Sybil, wonderfully witty evocation of life reduced to an absolute minimum design, the people strap hanging, holding
And you can feel the sway of the tube train from side to side as they hang on.
Yes, and I love the rush hour with the sort of elegant woman's feet in between the men just sort of
I remember images like that because I travel on the underground, and there used to be like an arch where you could see people on another level.
Right.
And I think that's where it comes from.
I think it is. I think it is. That's absolutely terrific. And the underground is the great symbol of modernity, particularly for Cyril power. And as we said about Pickle Herring Street, it's both beautiful and threatening. And these, just like Concert Hall, are supreme examples of that flight use of triangles, of circles, of intersecting circles. So if you just thought of them as abstract shapes, they're very fine and certainly full of movement and quite formal. But the effect of them is also ominous, isn't it? When he did these drawings, as you know, because you have the sketchbook for Wentz and Wither, he actually wrote on the bottom, you know, to the bottomless pit, so where people anonymous people being sucked into the depths. And the tube station, again, very beautiful, rather like the Claude flight buses with the tube going out of the frame. But there's this sense of that tunnel receding, you know, where are they getting sucked into? So the city is exciting, but it's also threatening.
It is, yes, you can see that. I mean, what did he call them? Homo mecanians.
Yes,
wasn't it? There was. I mean, there's the museum in Miami, the Wilsonian, has the complete print of Wentz and Wither, but they also have. There was the tube station. They have Wentz and Wither, but they have the tube station, the one on the right, with the 6 plates that go up, go towards making it. But I just feel that it typifies the cinema at the time as well.
Yes,
especially Wentz and Wither.
Yes.
And I always think of Huxley or whoever else it happens to be writing at the time.
Yes, there's Huxley and Evelyn Waugh. There's that sense of the sort of hecticness, and Virginia Woolf is terrifying about going down the escalator, actually, and sort of panicking as you go down into the escalator. And it's a recognition of the beauty of this, and also one of Hitchcock's early films called The Lodger has a great scene of hero disappearing down into the depths. So it's beautiful, and of course these are very colourful, but it's threatening as well. So that's one sense of modernity. Another is Sybil's sense of living in a new machine age. Now they're often called Prince of the Machine Age, aren't they?
Stephen Cobble's book was called Minor Cuts of the Machine Age.
And that's absolutely right. And Sybil was interested in machinery, but what she's more interested in is the balance of human effort against the machine. You know, that it's a sort of joint that humanity is like Homo mecanians, yes, but it's in a different way. And the winch, again, you see this centrifugal sense of the circle that Flight was talking about, but the giant cable. She said she was watching them lay this cable from Westminster, from the Parliament, across Parliament Square, and then underground to go up to the new 1928 Piccadilly Underground station. And she said they worked in teams. She'd only shown one winch, but there were several of these pulling the cable across the square. And it very like sledgehammers. She said they worked in rhythm, you know, heave it. And then she said, but it makes you look at what is happening. How do they pull? How do they tug? So she's interested in the body in relation to the machine, not just the machine itself. And these are very, very much of the time and full of power. And of course, also they connect with almost where we began, which is the whole idea of speed.
Yes. And here we have Claude Flight's Brooklands, which is probably one of the great prints. I think all three of these are actually.
Yeah.
So there's Flight's Brooklands being the world's first purpose-built motor racing circuit in Surrey. And the Bluebird speed trial is the Bluebird that Sir Malcolm Campbell raced to world records. And then on the right is Dirt Track Speedway, which is, would you call it dirt track racing? It came from Australia.
It did. And that's a very new sport. And it's only 1927 or so that the first races happened.
And it happened, they used to race around Wembley Stadium, which was built in 1923.
Yeah.
We were talking about
the
huge development of building in London. Of course, Wembley Stadium used to house 100 to 200,000 people for a football cup final. But here they used to race round that track at Wembley Stadium. It adorns the cover of the catalogue that came out that Stephen Coppell did in 1995, published by Scholar Press. And it is just an amazing lino cut, isn't it?
Yes, and quite right too. And the Flight's Brooklands and Speedway, the actual drivers and riders are subsumed. Yes, but they're subsumed into their machine. They are part of the, the handlebars could be their arms as well.
Where man and machine become one.
They absolutely become one. And in speed trial, the driver has disappeared altogether. Absolutely part of the line of the movement. So we've got this energy and these machines and this underground sense and this sense of speed. And then they also use this technique in slightly more sort of traditional ways for Sybil, but in terms of finding action. She said that, movement is all in the line. She said, if you find the line, you get the leap. And this is an absolute leap of line. And the formalization of the horses is very interesting too, because she actually wrote about that. She said, there are Byzantine horses, there are Greek horses, there are modern horses. You always sort of recognize the horse. What you need to get is the essence of the horse, the essence of the jump. And these are a superb example of that. Now you can see, as it were, she's a country woman. She knows point to points and she knows jumping and things like that. But also I think that just as with the bread and butter etchings, that she did realize there was another colleague at the Grosvenor School who they didn't think much of her art, but it sold fantastically well because it was all about hunting, dogs and things like that. So,
who was that?
I can't remember the
Ursula
name.
Fuchs.
No, it wasn't Ursula.
Ursula was one of her great friends.
No, it's not. I'll tell you later, Gordon. You can put in a bit, say what her name is. I think that she's, that she's actually quite commercially canny here, and it did sell. It sold best of all, I think, at the time.
Well, actually, talking about selling, we could just go back to Rex Nankerville and the Redfern. He had discussed, I should think, or Cyril Power was persuaded by him, for example, with the Tube Station, to print 2 editions. Because the first edition was 60, which was numbered 1 of 60 to 1660, and it was for the domestic market here, and it did very, very well. And he and Nankerville thought that this was a seller, and so they produced a second edition of 60 as well, with annotated 1 to 60 to 60 of 60 USA. And they did the same with, I think, with Lil Shudi as well, 1 or 2 other prints. So I was just
that's really interesting.
But Rex had this commercial brain.
Yes.
He was also a huge collector.
That's fascinating. And Sybil said they were editions of 50, but a lot of them are of 60.
Yes, they are over 50 and 60. And then you will see some which are annotated TP, which are trial proofs. In fact, there was one that recently came up for sale in Australia, which was TP5, and I saw that it was on a slightly different paper, which indicates that it was printed after 1946 in Canada.
Yeah.
And so what she must have done when she got to Canada, one must remember that they did not complete all the editions in one go, that they were hand printed and the ink was transferred, rubbing the paper with the back of a spoon. And so they made them in small batches. When Ethel Spowers in Australia said, "Gang, we've got a show at Melbourne Library," she would write to Flight, and Flight would contact all the others, and they would make small amounts which they sent off to Australia. But the one that says TP5 that came up recently was printed in Canada, because she must have made trial proofs to make sure that the post-1946 ones were of the same quality as the ones that she printed.
And in the wonderful print books that they came, where they had a page for each print, page for Full Cry, page for Water Jump, page for Cyril, and they write down how many they made exactly, say for Melbourne Library, for the Red Fen July, or so forth, and how many sold, etc. But they also make notes on which exact colours and tones they want for the block, so that when they make their next batch, they know what they're using. And Cyril's interesting about the difficulty of particular ones. And in fact, actually, there's an example here, because we think about action in the horse racing. He's very interested in the body and the intricacies of movement. Again, much more fluid than Sybil's boldness. And this is divertissement, which is charming, where you can sort of feel the jazz. This is jazz age, the jazz is coming out of that corner. Ding, 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 ding,
you can hear it.
You can, well, you can sort of see it with its zigzag powers and their great skirts. And the skaters, which is a particularly beautiful one, which is very difficult, because if you think we're working in blocks, he's actually far more intricate.
He is very precise. If you look at his other work as well, the one of Appy Amstead, it's very intricate, whereas hers is much simpler.
Exactly. And you see the red, he says that you have to be very careful to get the red around the edge of their body, or around their skirts and their legs, which gives that movement. And you think that that's a block, right? So this is a tiny, tiny strips. So the registration has to be absolutely perfect. And the care that you talked about, doing them in batches, but the care with each print is immense. And here, another passion of the day was folk dance, which they were very interested in. They went to watch the folk dancers at the Albert Hall and so on. But this is a straight, I love this one, because actually it looks as if they're jiving.
It does,
what folk dance they're doing. And they've got these sort of strange Grecian skirts and headdresses. But that's energy and movement and dynamism in the body. And also, I think the Flight thing about harmony and dynamism, that these are the two elements that go together, absolutely vital. And with dancing, this sense of new leisure, and you've already mentioned Wembley, of course, one of the other areas that make their prints so modern and of the time is sport. And here we have them moving both into sport, but also into the great public gallery of art of the time, which is the Underground itself.
Well, this was a series I think they made under the composite name of Andrew Power, something like 8 posters for the design guru of the Underground, Frank Pick. This was around about early 1930s, 33, 34. And you can see Power's tennis at the top and Sybil's poster design at the bottom. Now we have in this current exhibition of ours, which we've taken the name from your book, it's as Sybil and Cyril Cutting Through Time.
Lovely exhibition.
We have 2 drawings by Sybil of Wimbledon for the tennis. And of course, this is the relationship that they have, but the working together,
Yes.
where the tennis subject of Cyril's is used by Sybil in Wimbledon.
Yes.
And that wonderful liner cut of racing is transferred to the poster of Racing for Morden Station, and which is the final bend of the Epsom Racecourse, which is the Derby, which is held every June, and it's Tatnam Corners. You can just feel the
Yes,
the speed of the horses.
You can. It's a terribly simple thing, that flow, and also you feel all the crowds homing in at the side.
It's almost taken from a drone, isn't it?
Yes.
How she achieved that,
Could
I
be.
don't know.
And she does this extraordinary thing, which is if you're in any sort of high-speed vehicle and you watch things flashing past you, how they do go into that sort of long blur. And when she did racing, to elongate the horse, we talked about the abstraction, the different horse. We can see that there are jockeys on these horses, but it's totally beyond the real now. It's actually moved into what they were looking for, which is the essence of a moment. But so there they were, you know, with their posters on the tube, and the liner cuts really had taken off at this particular point, I think, from 1929 to the mid 30s.
And in 33, they had their joint show.
They did. They had a show of monotypes and monoprints. It's quite true. And they were still working, sharing a studio in Brook Green,
which is in Hammersmith by the River Thames.
Hammersmith by the Thames, where they would watch the rowers, watch the age, as it were, going by. And by now they had their own press too, their own hand press, and you can see the posters in their studio in this wonderful photo. And
there's the poster.
Yes, there is Wimbledon.
And then to hire a bus or coach, which is another, and cricket, Lords and Oval.
Yes, which you also have in this exhibition.
We do,
don't you?
We do
the cricket poster.
So we've got the cricket poster, and we've got a football poster, and we've got Aldershot tattoo, which are soldiers.
We have
with their beefeater hats on, not beefeater hats. What do you call them? Busbies.
Busbies. And you can see the press, the wheel, which are all covered over at the moment, and there's liner cuts stacked up. There are books stacked up. There's all sorts of things. Sybil terribly keen on flowers. She has flowers everywhere. She's also oddly domestic in the middle of all this, always making jam, always getting flowers.
She always said this was her studio, not his.
Yes.
So she occupied the studio, and he lived somewhere else and came to work there with her.
He did, and I think stayed there, quite often. But yes, it's definitely. And Brook Green was an area where there were many artists working at the time, so that's a very.
I think Leon Underwood was there, who was the sculptor.
Yes,
he lived in Girdler's Road.
He did, and there's a lot of similarity, I think, in I think Underwood's work is wonderful, and he had the young Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth were
students of his.
Students of his.
In that house of his.
A tremendous amount going on. But there's another dimension to their work too, which is actually turning away from the modern. And one of these was to do with their faith. I said that Cyril was a Catholic, Sybil was a Christian Scientist, and quite a few artists were, particularly women artists like Winifred Nicholson and others, because they're looking, as with racing, for what they see as an essence underlying the real, that the real is an illusion, that there's some sort of spiritual essence in the work. But although Cyril is the Catholic, it's Sybil who begins to do, at this particular point, a whole series of works on the Passion, which she will continue really throughout her life. Quite a lot of them, I think you've said, are actually of Christ carrying the cross, and that is, as you said, that whole business about leverage and weight
and the labour of man.
The labour of man.
That one sees in her agricultural prints.
Yes, you do. And this was the first that she did. She showed this at the Redfern in 1931. And it got tremendous reviews, but people saying they had never seen the crucifixion conveyed with such sort of power and force. And it's very abstracted, but it is the weight of those crosses, as you say about Labour, is tremendous. And of course, the whole thing is sort of fizzing with some sort of spiritual energy. It's about agony, it's also about energy, isn't it?
And it wasn't until maybe 10, 15 years later that Graham Sutherland paints his crucifixion, yes, which is very powerful. But I think this is a very, very underrated print. As you say, it's the first time that the crucifixion has been depicted in such a way.
And it shocked, and I mean, it shocked people in a good way. People went away and wrote about it. But it's interesting that Cyril, who was devout, really, but a much more mystical personality, interesting, and he held back, I think, from that sense of not quite being able to actually depict the mysteries in his art. And he was very interested, he became interested in spirituality and sort of around the world. You know, he looked at different traditions. He interested in African art, as so many people were. He's interested in South America, and he's interested in Persian. And he read and collected a lot. And so he actually looks for something in his prints, which is separate from the Christian tradition, which is really sort of elemental, kind of earth mothery. And this is, so they're very, very different. This is a very beautiful print, which you can put either way up. And it's yin and yang, you know, that's the two sides of the world and energy. I think he's, I think I said before, I think of them now, it's only recently really, as Sybil as the dramatist and Cyril as the poet. You know, you want to read and think a long time about what he's doing.
Do you think these images came from that Empire exhibition, where there were various stands, pavilions, yes, for Africa and for Asia?
Yeah. Yes, it was a great Empire exhibition at Wembley in 1924, which was supposed to celebrate empire and colonialism. And many people actually saw it as, you know, the beginning of the way people woke up to the shock and the horror of colonialism. And at that, they were very taken with the African pavilion, this fortress, this sort of Nigerian fort that was being built, where people had workshops, and they bought quite a lot of artifacts from there, including two wonderful Nigerian doors, which are now in the British Museum. So this starts a set of interest, but he then reads very, very widely. He read a lot about matriarchy, about primitive religions. So he has a mystique really of belief going much further back in time, before the Christian era. I'm particularly interested in the power of women as a sort of generative source.
Because one of the lino cuts, which is a single colour in blue, is called matriarchy.
Yes, yeah, yes. And this fits with a different side of their life, which is away from London. They're beginning to have a sense of the city as being a place to escape from, rather than
a yearning to go back to, yes, to the roots.
In a way. And in 1929, obviously the same year as the exhibition, Sybil's mother, Beatrice, had bought a small cottage in Woolpit, which is a village about 5 miles outside Bury St Edmunds. And Sybil loved it. Beatrice was an archaeologist. Her father had been, you know, have antiquarian interests. Sybil did too. And with the agreement of the other siblings, Beatrice specified in her will that Sybil could buy this for £250 when she died in 1929. And Sybil did. And this is where they used to spend their weekends. This is Cyril's woodcut, black and white woodcut of the cottage. And they were there, they played a lot of music, they researched the history of the village and the mysteries of the wells and things. They began playing the recorders and the pipes. Cyril was a great musician, particularly on stringed instruments. This is the wall paintings in their house that now disappeared. Of Hal, that's Sybil's brother, as the piper, and up and down the stairs. So they went between this sort of mock medieval weekends and summers and back into the rush of the city. And they did escape. Lovely photograph of Sybil in Sark. There was an exhibition in Sark. They took work out to, and they spent a holiday there. And that's her skirt that she made herself. She was very proud of. And then with her brother Hal, camping in the New Forest, and Cyril, who was not really a campy outdoor sort of person, was persuaded to join them. And here he is, playing his pipes in the forest. So there's that other lure that to get away from it, really, and to go, not only to get away physically, go from the city to the country, but also to go back in time. And music, and early music, becomes very important to them at this point. But they're still, as it were, supreme artists of the city. And this is Cyril's thing of taking inside the tube train.
I think this is one of Cyril's masterpieces. I think it is his masterpiece.
Yeah.
Actually, I've always thought either this or Went and Whither. And this was the first, my introduction to Cyril Power. I found this in a drawer in the Redfern Gallery.
Oh, wonderful.
Can I relate this story?
Yes,
so
please.
I opened the drawer and I found about 10 prints, and one of them was this.
Amazing.
And I put on a show about 1984, little black and white catalogue, with this in it. And it was hanging in the Redfern. And I saw an elderly gentleman looking at it. And I got off my chair and went to chat to him and explained who Cyril Power was and about the print and what a liner cut was. And he turned and smiled at me and he said, "Yes, I know all about Cyril Power. He was my father." And there was Edmund, otherwise known as Toby.
Right.
And as you say in your book, it's quite a sad story about Toby, because he was destined to go to Cambridge. And Cyril left the family, and poor Toby had to take a job at the Midland Bank at the time and eventually rose to become a bank manager. And when I met him, he had retired, but this was the print that started me off in the whole thing.
Wonderful.
So he introduced me he said, "Oh, you must meet my brother Kit," who was Edmund. And so I met Kit, and he was the one who kept all the liner cuts. So I was running the Redfern at the time, or a partner there, and that's how we started showing the work and disseminating it around from here, print fairs at the Royal Academy here to the print fair in New York. And so this is something very, very special to me.
Yes, oh, it is special. And it's wonderful the way that the exhibitions have gone on and gone around the world, and more people have seen them. But
you can see his intricacy, as you say, in the cutting. Sybil's would have been quite different, but here he's even got the type of the newspaper on the back. I think we said before that it'd probably be mobile phones now. But there are the strap hangers at the back and these mysterious eyes of light coming down.
Yes. It's like a German expressionist painting too, isn't it? Like Gross or something like that. And it's something I think that he was really pushing the boundaries. And this is something that you almost can't do in a lino cut, is to get this amount of character and detail. Each character, if you look at it, although they're faceless commuters, they're not actually faceless at all. They've got quite different personalities. You could make up stories about them. And I'm haunted by the young woman on the right, the only person that's looking, as it were, towards the artist, this white face. It's absolutely superb. But again, it's a sense that the city is in a way wonderful, interesting, full of people, but sucking you up. And by now, I think that Sybil's interest had really firmly turned back to
Suffolk.
Back to Suffolk and back to the country. And she begins this series of marvelous agricultural prints, again, full of rhythm. And she said in a letter, that she would stand on a corner of the lane at Woolpit and see these horses coming over the field, and then they turn and go back and they come again, and absolutely over the field. And she thought the farmer must have thought she was mad just standing there watching them. But it is a wonderful sense of power, and quite a different kind of abstraction of the horse. And it's very much about rhythm. And hazel, which is the cutting the hay with their scythes. As another thing about rhythm, she said it's like a dance, it's like a ballet, because they have to be so careful, because if you don't do it absolutely, rather like the heave-ho that she liked before, you cut your mate's leg off. Yes, exactly. They just had to work in complete rhythm. And so the rhythm in each of them is like the furrows, and the upright, and the animals and the men, as it were, working against it. Absolutely superb stuff. And so really by the 1930s, they were, Sybil certainly turning away from London. And as we saw at the beginning with Cyril's air raid, the rumours of war already coming. And Sybil went back to the New Forest, where she'd had these happy camping days with her brother Hal, and bought a tiny cottage, which she called Piper's. I haven't talked about how very important music was in their life, but certainly piping and playing. They had a great collection of musical instruments, particularly stringed instruments, which were Cyril's passion. So Sybil bought, you look at the top photo, which comes from her scrapbook, the very small building is the original Piper. Is the original Piper's. then Cyril designed, and we still have the plans, don't we?
Yes.
Designed what was, as it were, slightly called an extension to the cottage. Well, actually, it's a completely new two-story house, but beautifully designed. So
which is thatched as well.
It's thatched as well, organic, it fits together. And over a couple of years, that was built. And Sybil went and lived there. She loved being in the forest on her own. She began oil painting, actually, rather than lino cutting, though she still did them for shows. And Cyril would come down every weekends and come down for long periods in the summer and for holidays. And that was his sort of base, but he was actually working in London, architectural work working for London County Council at that point. And then when war eventually came, and you feel them floating apart a little bit here. And we remember now that Sybil is in her mid-40s, early 40s. Cyril is near 70.
Yeah.
It's that great difference. Yeah. Suddenly the difference
begins to tell.
And when the war came, Sybil went back to work, not as a welder this time, but working in the boatyard on the Solent in Southampton, where making small, fast craft, absolutely vital. And at the boatyard, she met the love of her life, really, or the second love of her life, Walter Morgan, who was nearer her own age. He was a carpenter. He was a wonderful, funny, but yeah, he's a boat builder. He'd lost an arm in the First World War, but he could do anything with his prosthetic arm. And they fell in love, and her diary just simply says, took the plunge. And actually, having decided to take the plunge, Sybil is a real goer. She, all the way through the story, you feel her taking these initiatives. But within a month, she told Walter, moved the things out, found him another, sent him back to live with Dorothy in New Malden, packed up the things, and
kicked him out.
And that was that. And within a month they were married. Walter and Sybil were married, and Cyril had gone. And and he was, I think, looking at the sketchbooks and the drawings he made then, and the poems, the quotations that he writes, briefly, if not permanently, heartbroken. She was the center of his life. And he went back to his wife. They had always kept in touch and lived in New Malden, not a romantic cottage in the New Forest, small semi. And he never made another liner cut, as far as we know.
But what we have got in this exhibition are some of his drawings that he did in London during the war.
Yes, he was very brave.
Go off into London from New Malden is, just so all our listeners know, it's near Kingston upon Thames, which is a suburb of London, a Surrey suburb of London, and it takes about 40 minutes to get into London by train. And he would wander around the city late at night and twilight and did these wonderful pastel drawings.
And he was working with the, I can't remember the exact name of the body, but with the sort of, during the Blitz and afterwards, with the rescue services as an architect from London County Council. So when an area was bombed, they had to send this team in first to work out whether it's safe for people, structurally sound for people to go in. So it's, although he's old, he's very, very much part of that wartime rescue effort. And as you say, when he wanders around London, what he notices are the places that have gone, the places that survive, and they're all overshadowed by this feeling.
When you researched the book and you went to Calgary, to the Glenbow Museum, and saw all her papers there, there was no correspondence. So she went there, and he's here, and desperately missing her, I'm sure.
Yes.
But there's no correspondence at all. She burnt them all. Well, she must have. We don't know.
And there would have been a two-way correspondence. They're both great letter writers. And when, in the time when she's in the New Forest and he's in London, coming up and down, I mean, letters clearly from what she says in her diary, like posted letter to Cyril, going up and down, demanding things, or she's sending him jam and he brings things down. And, just sort of general letters. But on both sides, the correspondence is gone. I don't know whether, Cyril's family was something that they didn't like to talk about, that long absence. That after he died, that would go. He died in 1951. Sybil, I think that it's extremely interesting because she kept all these little diaries. She kept lots of scraps. She kept masses of his work and his drawings, as well as her own in her archive. But the letters have all gone. So that's that.
And we have a portrait that she painted of him that she sent to the family here.
Yes,
which is hanging here.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Because she and Walter emigrated to Canada in 1947, all the way round through the Panama Canal, up past California, landing in British Columbia. They about as far as they could possibly go.
Pretty remote.
And their cabin near Campbell River, which was then just a logging and fishing small town. And she began to teach and devoted students. And then, as it were, she is discovered. She kept on her lino cutting and sold it in the corner shop. And then, as interest grew in Canada, and then after your exhibitions in Britain, she comes forth into the limelight. And so she lived to grand 94.
But she died, what, 1992? 1992.
And I think she was terribly pleased, and she was very concerned that Cyril's art should be shown alongside hers. So, in a sense, they are together till the end, and they're very much together on the walls here.
We might just add that the exhibition here is on until the 3rd of December, and it is we have lino cuts by Sybil and Cyril, and we have some drawings of Andrew Power, and we have posters. And we have some other sketches, and we have some of the sketchbooks, which are available to view as well. So, Jenny, I cannot thank you enough. I absolutely love your book. I'm on my second read of it. Just to tell anybody who's interested, we have the book available here, several of which Jenny has signed. It's published by Faber and Faber, and it'll be published in the States next year.
Yes.
By, who are they?
Farrar Straus.
Farrar Straus. And also to add that our overseas visitors, especially those in New York, should go and see Modern Life, which is a big exhibition which includes a lot of Sybil and Cyril at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It began on the 28th of October and runs through to, I think, the early part of January, around about the 9th. So, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's a huge pleasure. And it's wonderful being here with these prints that just sort of sing off the walls behind us. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.